Welcome back to the Celebration Pro podcast. Y'all, I am so excited because today I have Leah Weinberg, and she's the co-founder of Oduberg Law, LLP. And like the coolest thing about what she does is she's not only an attorney, but she's also a recovering wedding planner. Like, amen, I'm right there with you. And so she's like somehow married the two so that she can show up here for us. She's also the co-owner of the contract template shop Legally Set, which we all just need those templates, right? And the author of The Wedding Roller Coaster. And she was in the wedding industry, or has been really, for nearly a decade. She was the owner of ColourPop Events, which was based out of New York City. And she's returned to her roots as an attorney so that she can now educate all of us in the event industry, along with other entrepreneurs and business owners. You've seen her work. I know you have. She's been in print in Vogue, New York Times, People, CNN, CNBC, Bravo, which I love. I'll tell you a story about Bravo in a little bit. Martha Stewart, the Knot. I mean, you've seen her for sure. She's a WeddingPro Educator with the Knot and WeddingWire since 2020. And she's traveling throughout the country to share her insight with her peers. And you'll also see her at some of those national conferences like NACE and the special event. And Leah, like clearly you have the experience, and we're so grateful that you're bringing, your law background to us. So I appreciate you being here so much today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get started.
Yeah. So one thing, I'm just going to like throw this out there because as I'm going through, of course, Bravo comes up, right? And when I originally started Celebration Pros, it was actually called Celebration Society. And I was so excited that nobody had this name. And then I reached out to a lawyer who, she's similar to you, kind of helping the smaller businesses. And she was like, actually, Bravo owns that. I'm like, well, can either become a housewife or switch things up. So trademarks is something that is,
Oh, yes.
a
yes.
thing.
Did they use it for were they using it for anything, or was it just something they like parked?
It was originally a magazine out of Chicago, and I guess they bought the magazine. I don't know where it went from there, but they own the trademark. And I was like, I'm not going to
Don't mess with it.
Bravo.
Don't mess with it.
So, but anyways, I would love for you to share with our listeners. I mean, it can't be an easy feat marrying, pun intended, legalities with celebrations. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you've created this success?
So my first career was as a commercial real estate attorney. I practiced for close to a total of 10 years, and pretty quickly into my legal career, I realized that I was destined to be my own boss. I was always just paying attention to how things were run, how things were managed, what decisions were being made. And I was always like, why are we doing it this way? And I thought I could do it better. Not to say like I was a very good employee. I'm not sitting here like I wasn't talking back to my bosses and all of that stuff, but it was just really interesting. And so I started brainstorming different business ideas. I thought about opening up a doggy daycare, a dog walking service. I like to say that I came dangerously close to enrolling in pastry school because I thought I wanted to open up a bakery. And then event planning just kind of came as a potential idea. I thought it was a really good match for my skill set in terms of being really organized, detail oriented, understanding how to deal with people, managing a lot of different projects at the same time. But I kind of just put that on, it was an idea, sat marinated on it. And it wasn't until I got married in 2012, planned, designed my own wedding, and found it to be an easy and fun and enjoyable process, which I know is not a normal reaction for most people to planning a wedding. And so I decided to, after that, slowly take steps to get the business off the ground. I started ColourPop Events, had my first official wedding in October of 2013, quit my full-time job that following summer, but was still working part-time for a law firm, eventually went full-time with ColourPop in 2016. Had a lot of success, loved what I did. Obviously, then, the C word, COVID, hit and changed everything, especially, I think it impacted a lot of people, but especially in places like New York City, where we were completely shut down for so long. And it impacted just how business was run. And I believe that it impacted how people behave going forward. And so coming out of COVID, I just wasn't enjoying it as much. And I've kept my bar license active throughout the whole time that I was a wedding planner. And honestly, it just hit me. I'd been doing paralegal work with my now law firm partner since the beginning of COVID, just to make some extra money. Everybody was updating their service contracts during that time. And she was always joking. She's like, "You're going to come back one day. You're going to we're going to go into business together." And I just denied it up and down for so long, like to the point where I felt like I was leading her on by continuing to help with like paralegal stuff. And then I will never forget, it was April 2022. I was driving to a site visit, and in the car is like my driving time's like my thinking time. And I was like, oh my God, I need to go into business with Coombe. We need to start this law firm. Like, this is it. This is what's happening. And so, I still had my 2022 weddings to finish out. I had honestly stopped booking most stuff at the end of 2021 because 2022 is booked. And so we kind of spent like end of summer and fall getting things going. We've both started businesses before. So starting a new one was honestly, it happened pretty quickly. We knew what we were doing. We knew what needed to happen. And so Oduberg launched at the beginning of January of this year. And then Coombe had legally set already, but I came on as a co-owner of that at the beginning of this year too. So yeah, we're excited. I love educating event pros on legal stuff because, like you mentioned, it's not something that they get a lot of exposure to or know a lot about. And it's so, so, so important, especially kind of with the climate that we're seeing lately, with clients being a little litigious and cranky.
Oh, here in the Keys, I always said we actually are fortunate because the people who come down to the Keys, they're coming to like a vacation destination. Yeah. So I think in this region, they're actually like pretty chill. I mean, there's we've had our moments. But when you're in the cities like New York, like it's not always so chill. So kudos to you for all the work you put in. And actually our timelines are similar. I started my wedding business in 2015 and I left like in the middle of COVID. And then I went back to corporate, and then now I've, it's funny how COVID really shifted, I think, a lot of people's perspective on how they can, what they can do with their expertise. And I love that.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking beforehand about, where the majority of all of you listening in are from. And a lot of you are from the Southeast. And right now we're heading into a slower season because it's summer. I mean, if you go outside right now, there's probably like 20 mosquitoes just in my car alone because I opened the door and closed it. Like, oops. It's like hot, it's muggy, it's buggy. And so a lot of the times we're not so busy starting around this time of year. And it's the perfect time to really like look into the bones, the nuts and bolts of your business, and really just start fine tuning, updating, right? A lot of things change quickly, especially following COVID. So Leah, I'm curious if you could tell us a few items that you might suggest taking a second look at, or how we can best keep everything legally legit.
Yeah, there's some basics that I kind of run everybody through, and I feel like is a good kind of audit checklist. The first one is how you're operating your business, whether as a sole proprietor or some kind of legal entity. For folks who are sole proprietors, I always encourage them, unless there's some other kind of reason, because I know sometimes finances, accounting considerations particularly prevent people from forming entities, but whether that's an LLC, a corporation, a partnership, that is the best way to protect your personal assets and separate your personal life from your business life. And so for folks who have kind of maybe been putting that off, if you didn't have the funds to do it initially, and now you're a few years into business and you might be able to do it now, that's definitely something to consider. So talk to your lawyer, talk to your accountant about doing that. There's also insurance, making sure you have the appropriate insurance for your business. It's different for a lot of different folks. I mean, everybody should have general liability depending on what you do, especially for wedding planners. I always had a professional liability policy. People like photographers, DJs, bands who have equipment, videographers, they should have insurance covering their equipment as well. So always helpful to check up on that. And then the big one is your service agreement. So figuring out how long has it been since you had an attorney review your agreement? Have you ever had an attorney review your agreement? Or is it something I've had folks have come to me and they're like, yeah, I literally just I took different clauses from different free resources online and I just put it together.
Guilty.
So yes, now is the time, like, your contract, number one, it's the foundation for the relationship with your client. So it sets just that core, the obligations, the payment obligations, the services, the expectations. It's setting the groundwork for that. And it's so important because it's if something goes wrong, that's the first thing you're going to come back to. So whether you have an attorney you can take a look at it, whether another great option, if you don't have the funds to hire an attorney to do something custom for you, is to purchase an attorney drafted template online through like our service Legally Set, for example. And even with those those are all generally drafted. So you should have an attorney in your area just review it for state-specific provisions. But yeah, it is time to have those contracts like really solid and nailed down, because I talk to so many people and they're like, well, I've been doing it this way and it's been fine so far. And I always say, like, it's fine until it's not. And then when it's not, we're in big trouble. So focus on those service agreements. And then also just taking a look at what other agreements you have in place. Like if you have a team, if you've got like a virtual assistant, people working for you on like behind the scenes stuff, admin stuff, just now's a good time to kind of do an audit of those agreements too, to make sure scope of work hasn't changed, payment terms haven't changed, all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, I love it. And again, just being summer, right? So we've got July, August, September. So those of you listening, you've got 3 months. Let's schedule it in. And definitely check out Legally Set if you haven't had a lawyer look over your current agreements and your current paperwork. When I first started, I had a friend whose dad was a lawyer. And I was like, I have no idea what type of law he does, to be honest, even to this day. And I was like, can he look at this and just make sure that like, because that's exactly what I did. I went on Google and like, apparently I pulled the right things. He thought it was fine, but it was, it's a guessing game for us. And for Leah, it's what she does. It's her knowledge. And so instead of having to do this guessing game, the templates are great prices too. So highly recommend. Now, unfortunately, there may be times in our businesses where we're not sure how to protect ourselves before or after like a particular situation has occurred. Can you give a few examples of when it's time to seek professional advice or representation when a situation might arise?
Yeah, I always say I kind of break things into categories. So there's some stuff folks can handle on their own. There's some stuff that like could go either way. And then there's those times when it's definitely like you need to bring an attorney involved. I will start off by saying that I think it's really important to start a relationship with an attorney before you actually need one. So find somebody in your state. Now with things being so virtual, you don't have to find somebody who's like within your particular town or area. It can be just somebody in your state, but you want to find somebody, you want to make sure you like them. You want to make sure they have a good reputation, like shop around, ask for referrals, all that stuff. But have somebody lined up so that when stuff does go wrong, you're not panicking, you're not sending you're just not emailing a bunch of people trying to see who's available. I have had plenty of people just kind of like chat with me. I get to learn about their business. They let me know what's going on. And then we end with, so if I ever need anything, I can just like give you a call or email you. And I'm like, absolutely. Like we've talked about my process, our fees, how we work, all of that stuff. So they know. And then when the time comes, they are free to reach out. So that's really important. The stuff that I feel like you can handle on your own comes up mostly in terms of like the initial client onboarding. So when they're signing your contract, if they have certain comments to it that are more business type things. So if they are asking you to maybe change your payment structure and instead of 2 payments, break it up into 4. If I would tell any business owner, like that's purely a business decision, you get to decide whether you want to do that. Or if maybe they don't want you to use their photos from the wedding publicly, purely business decision. And if you have a fee associated with that, or if you don't care, like you get to decide. And then in terms of, there's the gray area, which is some certain contract comments. So like we talked about certain things that I think you can handle on your own. But then if somebody is coming back with comments on your indemnification provision, on your cancellation or rescheduling policies, force majeure, those are the types of things where I think it's helpful to bring an attorney in because those can be complicated. They all have to work together. And so when you make a change to one section, it's impacting the others. So that gets a little complicated. And then when I always recommend you bring in an attorney. So honestly, before you sign anything of any kind of like significant value, if you're providing a service for somebody, or if you're hiring somebody, if there's an exchange of money, if you are going into business with somebody, like please, please, please have an attorney draft that contract. We have seen multiple situations where people didn't have anybody involved at the beginning to draft those partnership agreements. And now things are dissolving and it's not pretty because either they didn't have an agreement that outlined how we break up, or they signed something and then ultimately didn't like what it said. I've had people sign, like even friends sign contracts for like marketing services, and then the person ended up really not working out. They weren't doing their job. There just was like not an alignment on vision and values. And they sent me the contract to look at. And I was like, this is a really bad contract. You should have had me. I feel bad saying that, but I'm like, you should have had me look at this before you signed it because it's terrible. So really, like, it is really important to get an attorney involved in situations where you're signing stuff because you just never really know. And I also, especially the going into business thing, because I as a wedding planner was always a big fan of prenups, because having been a lawyer on the front end who had relationships with divorce attorneys and like saw what happened. I remember I talked to one day because I was always just like, I was frankly fascinated by people who were married for like 20, 30 years and then got divorced. I'm like, what happened? And he was just like, people change. And so in marriage, in business, the person you're going into business with, and you on that first day, you are different people than the ones who are deciding to part ways, and for better or for worse. And so always having those agreements in place at the beginning and having an attorney guide you through that is really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When I started my business, I didn't know where it was going to go, but as it started evolving, I was like, oh, I definitely want to, like, how much fun would this be to have somebody else to like play wedding planner with, right? It's like fun. It's, we get to do the designs and go networking together and travel and celebrate. And, and so you want to have somebody there to share it with. And so I brought on a business partner who I knew. We had worked together in the corporate space for a short period of time, and we knew each other. And I had worked with her as a planner when she was in corporate and things like that. And when we first signed together, when she came on, we spent a year where she was acting partner, right? And so that way we were able to make sure that we were a good fit. And then she, of course, signed on, and our values were like, we were like yin and yang. We worked so well together. We like to do the same things. Like, we were inseparable for a very long period of time. And then I got pregnant, and then I had my son. And then I started leaning onto the vendors more than I was our clients, because of course I went this education route that was clearly on my heart. And then COVID happened. And now our values, they weren't aligning anymore. And I loved when you were like, when you break up, right? And and exiting that was hard, but I was really lucky that it wasn't messy. We were able to have the conversations. And that's not always going to be the case. We do have an exit agreement. There's things in there that I have to adhere to following, and vice versa. But it makes it clear. There's no gray line. And and we're still very much friends, and I still have a pinky toe in the business, which makes me very happy.
Yeah. I mean, it's so helpful. Like nobody wants to think about things going bad or ending, but if it does happen, it's so smart to just figure it out at the beginning before things have changed, before you're not seeing eye to eye, before, before it gets emotional, like have that stuff done at the beginning. The other thing that I forgot to mention that's really important, and I'm a big believer in this, is that when client disputes arise, and when us wedding professionals get that first email in where the client is not happy about something, or it's post-wedding, or they're demanding a refund, or it's pre-wedding and they want to terminate, do not respond without talking to an attorney. And I know that's kind of a pain, and it draws out the process. I mean, you can respond and you can say, just let them know, hey, I've received this email. I will get back to you shortly. But don't respond with anything substantive, because what happens in those situations is initially we panic. It doesn't feel good. We want it to go away. And so we probably apologize. And in some cases, we also offer things to make it better and to make it go away. And then 48 hours.
Admitting guilt, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Potentially, yes, potentially. And so then 48 hours later, we've had time to think about it. And we're like, oh, this was not our fault. We had nothing to do with this. I'm not giving them anything. But unfortunately, you've already sent that first email where you've essentially taken on responsibility or offered them something. And so I really think it's important to get an attorney involved just to consult with. I'm definitely not saying don't have your attorney jump into the process right away and email them back. That's escalating things, and that's probably going to be pretty aggressive. But just talk to your attorney, just let them know what's happening. Maybe they'll take a quick look at your contract and let you know just what they think, where this could end up, and give you advice on how to respond. Sometimes that stuff that I'm not even billing my clients for, it's a 15-minute email response or a quick conversation, and every attorney is different in terms of how they treat that. But again, that's why you want to have somebody lined up. But be really careful about what you say in those initial responses back on client dispute emails.
So I have a question there. If, say I receive an email, just like you're saying, client's not happy, they want to part ways, and or maybe receive compensation for something, whatever it might be. Is that something where we could come to a law firm like yours and, of course, like you're saying, say, this is what's going on, I need some guidance here. Do you have almost template responses that they can work off of in those scenarios? So anytime somebody wants to terminate, I have a resource to go to.
Honestly, it's something we're actually working on. So it doesn't exist yet, but you are now the third or fourth person to kind of bring up the idea that these sort of templated responses would be helpful. They don't exist yet, but essentially what it is going to involve is pointing to a provision in your contract, or the lack of a provision in your contract, depending on what's happening. I mean, there's times when things are just not working out, and sometimes you realize, yes, it actually would be easier if I just parted ways with this person, and sometimes give them all their money back. I know people are not there are people who are not fans of ever giving refunds unless you have to. This is just purely this is not a legal decision. This is purely personal. And my position as a business person, sometimes it is just easier to give somebody their money back, to make them happy, to make sure they're going to walk away cleanly, and to just release that from your plate and your energy and your mind and your mental well-being. Like I refunded 5 figures to somebody during COVID who kept postponing because I just knew it was going to be easier for me to say goodbye and to make this a clean break than to like try to keep any of their money, have them be unhappy, have them keep emailing me, you know, the potential for bad reviews, all of that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, again, that was a little sidebar, but going
No,
back
that's
to
okay.
going back
Relevant.
to the templated response. Yeah, it's about like, you know, the response back is going to refer to, if you don't want to terminate or you don't want to give them money back, you're going to refer back to specific provisions in your contract and say like, you don't have the right to do this. Or if you are open, if things have soured and you're just like, oh, it would be really easier to, you know, let this person go, then, you know, you say, I want to acknowledge like you're not like nothing has happened where you're permitted to do this under the contract. I'm prepared to offer you either part ways now. I keep your money, but I don't charge you your final payment. I am willing to part ways, but I need to get paid for what I've done so far, or I'm willing to just part ways and give you your money back depending on timing.
Right.
So, yeah, but yeah, it's always, and that goes back to that contract, why that contract is so important, because it needs to be thorough enough. It needs to be thorough enough so that when situations like that happen, it's just very clear what can or can't be done.
Mm-hmm. And it brought me back to a time when I had a couple who it was a South Asian wedding. And I'd never done one before. So I was totally green, but they liked my ideas because they were more on the budget side. And they weren't straightforward about their budget and what they were looking for. Right. And so it ended up causing a lot of tension between us. I was crying. I was like, and I was very green in my business in the beginning. And I'm like, this is more cumbersome than I can handle. And I'm on the phone crying with them. And I'm like, I'm giving you your money. I'm so sorry, you know, like whatever it was. And I did end up parting ways. And where was I going with this? Because you had brought, and I think that it's really important in business. I feel like this whole conversation is like, you know, we take supplements and vitamins for our body. These are the supplements and vitamins for your business so that you're proactive, so that you don't, you know, so taking that advice of if it's not a good fit and it's clear, the more you hang on, the more drama and turmoil in your business, right? And then that's going to take up so much time and you're not going to be able to focus on the right clients and moving your business forward. And I think that that's great advice when you're in that moment and you know it's time to part ways. Yeah.
There's always, I always say there's the legal decision, what you have the right to do legally or what they have the right to do legally. And then there's the business decision, and they're not always the same thing.
Yeah. And I like a lot of what you're saying. And my personal business coach says it all the time, facts over feelings. So when you're preparing with all of this on the front end, you can feel emotional about it, but you already have what you need in place to just focus on the facts.
Yeah.
And just keep it to that. So that's great. Okay, Leah, I have some fun Q&A if you're ready.
Ready.
So the first one, I like to know this because I'm a professional development junkie. What are you listening and or reading? Listening to and or reading?
Yeah, one of the recent books that I read was Unreasonable Hospitality. I don't know if you've heard of this one. Actually, Renee Dallow is the one who mentioned this. So I have always said one of my favorite business books was Setting the Table by Danny Meyer, who is the restaurant king icon. And what I loved about it, I always love learning from people in other industries and applying that to whatever it is that I'm doing. And so for him, how Danny Meyer talked about hospitality was just like a game changer for me. And it was something I really brought into my wedding planning business. And so the author of Unreasonable Hospitality is kind of like a mentee of Danny Meyer. And I say it's like part 2 of Setting the Table. It's talking more about hospitality particularly in the restaurant industry, but it's just ideas that we can have going into any kind of business, like how you serve your clients, how you're going above and beyond, how you're thinking outside of the box of what you can do differently to serve them. And so that has been really, I love that type of stuff and love taking those kind of ideas and figuring out how to bring that into whatever it is I'm working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote both down. I'll put them in the show notes so everybody else can get in on that too. And I think that having those moments that, what do we surprise and delight, right? But that's what it's all about. It's
exactly.
We live in the exclamation industry, so we want to make sure we bring that excitement through.
And I'm big on gifting is one of my love languages. So like I like receiving gifts, but I also love giving gifts. That is sort of how I express like love and appreciation for people. And when I was still wedding planning, I started working with a custom gift person who I can send her boxed by Dami. She's amazing. She's based out of Houston, but she worked with me on custom gift boxes. And whereas before I would send like maybe sugar fina candy or something like small and cute when people signed on, the reactions once I started doing this custom gifting, like clients were like, oh my God, this made my day, or this just solidified like why we hired you in the first place. Like the reaction was so different and it brought on so much excitement. So yes, I'm big with
and they'll share
gifting.
it. Like that's their like Instagram moment and they get all excited and then other people see that and
and when I did my book, I did a whole huge gifting campaign that cost me a lot of money, but I loved it. It was so much fun.
And I'll make sure to put the link to your book as well.
Perfect.
In the show notes too. Okay. So in 1 year, if and when you and I are sitting at a table, because I would love to.
Yes.
And we're popping a bottle to celebrate something in your life or business, what would we be celebrating 1 year from now?
We are going to be celebrating because I'm manifesting this and putting it out into the universe. We're going to be celebrating my husband and I purchasing the house that we are currently renting.
I love that.
Yes. So that's our big 1 year goal.
That's amazing. Getting that investment in and yes. Awesome. Very cool. And can you tell our listeners, we've talked a little bit about it, but where can they find you? Because clearly they need you.
Yes.
And then if you have like an offer or something coming up, please let us know too.
Yeah. So the law firm is Oduberg.com. We serve small business owners and entrepreneurs in New York, Pennsylvania, Georgia. So hopefully some of your Southeast folks are there, and also Washington, D.C. And then the contract template shop is legallyset.com. I am happy to actually create a 20% discount code for your listeners that we can drop in the show notes as well. And on Instagram, I am at the Leah Weinberg. So I'm also happy just to continue this conversation. So if people have questions, they want to DM me, they want to email me, like, please do not hesitate to reach out. If you have questions about what we may or may not be able to help out with, I'm happy to answer that as well. So yeah, just happy to keep chatting with folks.
Yeah, amazingly. This is really great. I know everyone's going to be like either in their cars or in their office, and you're gonna maybe get a little influx of people who might need you. Thank you again so much. This has been wonderful.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.